Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 807. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about battles and castles, architecture and olives, paradors and reconquistadors, as we go to the province of Jaén in Andalucia, Spain. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Jaén. I'd like to welcome to the show Molly Sears-Piccavey from Piccavey.com. That's PICCAVEY.com. And also SpainFoodSherpas.com. And Molly has come to talk to us about a region of Andalusia that I didn't know until very recently, and you may also not know. Molly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to talk to you about Jaén today, and that's somewhere that is spelled Jaen, even though it sounds like it's with an H.
Well, and first I'd like to get up front here and thank Molly for her patience. We've had a couple technical difficulties and at least one idiot at the keyboard on this end of the call that have caused some problems, so we're doing some re-recording here. But I appreciate Molly's patience because this is a place that I think you should know about. Now, Molly, first of all, we're talking about Spain, but your accent is not Spanish.
Oh, that's right.
What's your connection with Spain?
I was actually born in Nottinghamshire in the UK, and I've been living in Spain since 1998. So I moved in 1998 to Barcelona, and now I live in Granada in the south of Spain in Andalusia. And the reason I'm so immersed in Spain is because when I was 12 years old, I learnt Spanish and did a school exchange with a Catalan girl. So travelled to Spain very often throughout my childhood and just got completely hooked.
Excellent. And why are we talking about Jaén? Why should someone go to Jaén?
So Jaén is a province in Western Andalusia that is not really very known or associated with tourism. If we take southern Spain, which is, we call it Andalusia, the community, the western side of Andalusia, which is Granada, Cordoba, Jaén, and Almeria, is not as touristic perhaps as the other side of Andalusia, which is where Malaga and Seville is. So Cordoba
Hmm.
and Granada are very visited because of their Muslim architecture, such as the mosque or the Alhambra Palace. But Jaén is inland and a little bit further away, and many people don't manage to discover Jaén. And I think Jaén has a lot to offer the visitor.
Well, and it also doesn't have a major airport, and so you do need to come in from someplace else like Granada or Sevilla. And so that definitely, I think, also probably limits why people get there.
Yes, to travel to Jaén, the best option would be actually to fly into Malaga Airport or to fly into Granada Airport. Granada Airport is actually quite close to Jaén. I think it's just, well, it depends on which bit of Jaén you're going to, but it's actually just an hour away, and the roads are very quiet and excellent kind of highways to get there. So to fly into Granada, I mean, from Madrid or from Barcelona is actually quite simple. For me, the thing that sticks out most in my head are the olive trees. So it's the place in Europe with the most density of olive trees, and they produce obviously a lot of olive oil. And so when you travel to Jaén, wherever you look, you're just seeing olive trees. And even on the road to Jaén as well, it's just olive trees as far as you can see.
Hmm.
And it's also a place that has a massive amount of castles and fortresses. They claim to be the place with the most castles in Europe, but I've also read that Wales has a lot of castles per square mile, so I'm not sure about that title, but I do know is that they have a lot of castles, and some of them are in very good states of conservation. Bergalimar, which is in Baños de la Encina, is actually the oldest castle in Europe, and it's so worth visiting.
Excellent. Well, I think you had a saying that they use for their region in Spanish.
Oh, yes, so they call Jaén the land of battles and castles, but I think they're missing the olive oil, so it should be battles, castles, and olive oil.
Excellent. Well, and one of the reasons why the battles and the castles is we're talking about a region that for 250 years was the border between Catholic Spain and Moorish Spain. Granada was still unconquered for 250 years after the reconquest of Jaén, and so you built a lot of beautiful, what are now beautiful hilltop walled towns and castles and fortifications, and so that's one of the things that makes it stand out as a region to go to. What kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
Oh, yes, so there's quite a few places that I think should be on our itinerary around the Jaén province. So we must start with Jaén capital, which is the capital city of Jaén. So it's the province of Jaén takes its name like a state in the US, and the city is also called the same name, Jaén, which is a little bit confusing. But yeah, we should certainly visit the capital city of Jaén. And then
Hmm.
Ubeda and Baeza, which are two towns that are UNESCO World Heritage Sites for their spectacular architecture. Then we also must make a stop in Alcalá la Real, which is a town on the border between Granada and Jaén. It belongs to Jaén, but only just. The locals who live in Alcalá la Real actually come to Granada to do their shopping because it's easier for them to drive to Granada than it is to go to Jaén. So certainly we must visit those places. Those are high on my itinerary.
Excellent. Well, we're starting in Jaén. What are we going to do in or see in Jaén?
So Jaén is the most well-known point of interest in Jaén is its cathedral. So the Cathedral of Jaén
Hmm.
has two very large towers that kind of dominate the skyline of the city. And the cathedral is very large in dimensions. And most importantly, the architectural footprint or the design of the cathedral is very symmetrical and very beautiful in an architectural kind of way of speaking. And it's been used, the footprint, the design has been used for the building of other cathedrals in South America, such as, well, Mexico and Colombia. So cathedrals such as Cusco, Sucre, Merida, you can directly see a link if you look at the shape on the outline of those cathedrals compared to the one with Jaén. So the architect was Van de Vida. He's got like streets named after him, and for example, his sculpture is outside of the Jaén Cathedral, and it's actually considered on the waiting list, I believe, to be declared UNESCO World Heritage, the cathedral, for that reason, for this
Right.
architectural reason.
Well, the other interesting thing for me about the cathedral is that I hadn't seen this before. The interior has balconies because there's a well-known relic in the cathedral, the Veil of Veronica, reported to be either from the 1st century or the 14th century, depending on who you listen to, which is true with a lot of the relics from the Middle Ages. Whether that's really a piece of the True Cross or the Veil of Veronica or whatever, they made for great tourism. Once you had a relic, you got a lot of people to come. And so Vandalvita put in all these balconies so that people could, on the appropriate days, see the veil, for instance. So that's different. And then it also has balconies on the outside, which have great views of the nearby mountains.
I do know that the Veil of Veronica, that you could see it on Fridays between 11 and 1, but I'm not sure if that's still the case. On those balconies, the balconies are very high up above the nave of the cathedral, and just the view
Mm-hmm.
from those balconies down into the cathedral is stunning and very quite unique. And then I
Mm-hmm.
know that the archive of the city of Jaén was held in some of those rooms that are behind those balconies for many, many years. It's not the case now. I mean, those archives remain, but the recent archives from the city, the births, deaths, and marriages, aren't held in the cathedral anymore. They're all held in a government building, but the historic ones are there in the cathedral.
Excellent. What else are we going to see in Jaén?
After visiting the cathedral, which is kind of in the main town, in the historic part of town, we have to go right up the
Mm-hmm.
top of the hill. Perched above the city is the Parador de Jaén and the castle of Santa Catalina. And this viewpoint is magnificent. So if the cathedral is already big and these towers are very dominating the skyline, imagine to be perched up above the city, looking down onto the cathedral, onto the city, onto the surrounding hillsides and all of these olive trees that disappear into the distance. Is quite an amazing view. Any Spanish Parador is always worth a stop. But that Parador, I really enjoyed being there when I've been.
Well, and you say Paradise, and we haven't talked about them a little bit on Amateur Traveler. So this is a chain of national hotels, either in significant locations or in significant old buildings. In Ronda, where I've stayed, it's in the old city hall. There are other places it's in old monasteries. Or like here, it's in a significant location where it's next to the old castle and built in a style as if it were a castle, but built in the 1960s. I think Franco started the Parador system, but they're a Spanish treasure. If you get a chance to stay in a Parador or eat lunch in a Parador or something, they're worth a visit.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, whenever I'm traveling, I always try and look out if there's a Parador nearby or one I can go for lunch or even for just stop off for
Mm-hmm.
coffee. I've done that before quite a few times in a place called Tortosa, which is just near to Tarragona, because driving down from Barcelona, driving south, it was a nice stop, and we stopped there and had the local delicacy, like the local pastries and coffee, as a morning stop,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just stopping off at some boring service station. And that had amazing views as well. Yeah, so Paradors, they're very interesting buildings because of what you're saying, either the location or the history behind the building, or they're very dramatic many of the times. I mean, even the one in Granada is set inside the grounds of the Alhambra.
Oh, I'd forgotten that. Excellent. Well, and this particular one, you mentioned the view. I think the view from the hilltop towns in Jaén, from Jaén or from Ubeda or Baeza, I think it rivals the views in Tuscany. The difference being that instead of a lot of vine, you're seeing a lot of olive trees. The tourism board told me there's 65 million olive trees in the province. So quite a lot of hilltop towns, and then in between them is this valley filled with olive trees. And then again, if you look south from the Parador or from the castle right next to it, you see the hills, the mountains, one of the set of mountains that surround this area. And this is the Sierra Magina?
Yes, Sierra Mágina is the natural park that's closest to the city of Jaén. So, yeah, it's the one that's most visible. But there's also another natural park which is very large in expansion, which is Casola and Segura and Las Villas. So it's like a group of three, almost three kind of locations. And that is right at the top of the province of Jaén. So lots of opportunities for people who are doing outdoor pursuits, whether that be mountain biking or hiking or horse riding or what have you. There's so many stunning locations. And I mean, I was saying about these fortresses and ruins and castles. There are many which are in very difficult to find places or off the beaten track. So if you were hiking, you
Hmm.
might get the opportunity to see ones, whereas if you were just by road or sticking to towns and villages, you probably wouldn't come across.
Excellent. Well, and I know the tourism board would certainly like us to add the national parks to your list there of things to see in the province. I did not see any of them, so I can't comment, but I've heard wonderful things about them. Any particular area in or around the national parks that you would recommend? I know you're not a hiker.
No, I'm definitely not a hiker. I'm a city girl. So I'm very much into my food, gastronomy, museums, architecture, all that kind of thing, and lots of concrete.
Hmm.
Next to Sierra Mágina, there's a charming little village called Pegalajar, and in the village is a restaurant called Alcúzar, and I think it's one of the best meals I've ever had in all the time I've lived in Spain. The wine list they had there was incredible. It was something on a par as what I would expect in Madrid or I don't know, some fancy restaurant. That really the wine list was spectacular and they had amazing olive oil. I mean, of course they did. They're in Sierra Mágina. But I don't know, just everything, the bread, the wine, the olive oil. It was almost like going to somebody's family house to have lunch and they brought out the best of everything. They were charming, but the food was amazing. But it's one of those places you don't kind of walk in, expect lunch to be an hour and leave. You're kind of there for the day. But it was amazing.
Okay. Excellent. Well, back in Jaén, what else are we going to recommend people see? We said there was a castle next to the Parador. I guess we should mention that you can tour the castle as well.
Yes, so the Parador is a modern built building which is right next to the castle. You can visit the castle. The most important thing of the castle is its position, its location above the city, and the
Right.
views it has, rather than the actual monument in itself. But yeah, certainly people visiting Jaén, it's well worth driving up to the Parador, even if you're just stopping for coffee and a photo, is so well worth it. And yes, you can visit the castle and see the views from either side of the hill. But once we've visited the cathedral and the castle, there's another monument that is very important and worth visiting, and that's the hammam, or the what they call in Spanish the Arab baths. And they discovered it only recently in 1913. Basically, the hammam had been filled in with a lot of rocks and rubble so somebody could build their palace, and it had been kind of lost, almost lost forever. And then it was rediscovered in 1913 and it's been recovered. And now we can visit it. And it's the largest Arab baths or hammam in Spain. In the same building, because the ground floor is the hammam,
Hmm.
it's still this palace that was built. They've kind of taken out the bottom part, but the rest of it they've left. The palace has a very beautiful view from the top. Again, a different perspective than the one you have from Santa Catalina. You can kind of see the cathedral much closer, but it's a
Hmm.
very nice viewing, like a terrace where you can view things. And then on the top floor of this building, they have a museum called the Museum of Naive Art. Now, I'd not come across naive art before, and the only way I can describe it is from a distance, it looks like children's drawings because they're very colourful and using like the primary colours and very simplistic lines. It makes
Hmm.
me think of Mexican rugs or those kind of colours, very vibrant colours, very happy colours. And that museum has a collection of naive art where the artists are international. I found it a total surprise. I didn't expect to come across that, and I'd never seen that before. And I really enjoyed being there because usually when I've been to Spanish art museums, they tend to be very dramatic and things to do with the Inquisition or religion or battles or anything doom and gloom. So this was a complete contrast to that.
So it's the opposite of El Greco, you're saying?
Exactly that.
Excellent. Anything else we want to see in Jaén?
So in Jaén, I must point out that they have excellent food. Generally in the province of Jaén, you're going to eat very well. But in Jaén, the city, it's known for its tapas. They will give you a complimentary tapa if you ask for a beer or a Coca-Cola. And sometimes you can choose it from a list, and sometimes it will just appear before your eyes. So if you have allergies or if you're vegetarian or something, then maybe it's best to tell them when you order your food or as soon as you arrive at the restaurant, because, yeah, it's just easier. And also there's a Michelin star restaurant called Baga, Baga, that's notable and very popular, and they don't have a lot of covers, so often you will phone and there's no room for months. So if you're planning to go to Jaén, maybe best to book your table at Baga if you're interested in Michelin star cuisine, and then book your flight ticket afterwards. Because it's very in demand, it's very popular.
Konnichiwa, I'm Yuki, a tour leader with Explore. Who knew that hidden among Tokyo's towering skyscrapers was a peaceful tea house surrounded by ancient trees and serene ponds? Actually, I knew. It was my mother's secret sanctuary. Not everyone knows about Tokyo's Hamarikyu Gardens. Arigatou gozaimasu. But you will if you explore. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel, explore.
These are violent criminals, so they're not going to go down easy.
ABC Tuesdays.
Let's get this done.
The Rookie is back.
We have 2 new rookies starting today.
Howdy.
Being a cop is stressful 24/7. Every year on the job is different.
And Training Day
We have a serial killer at large.
never ends.
We need an ambulance!
The Rookie. All new Tuesdays on ABC and stream on Hulu.
I think you're a little more into your food than I am, but okay, excellent. Are we ready to move on to Ubeda?
Of course. So Ubeda is a short drive from Jaén, and it's UNESCO World Heritage, along with its neighbour Baeza. The architecture in Ubeda, which is what stands out the most, is Renaissance, and it's second in the world for its collection of Renaissance architecture after Florence. And most of it is concentrated in a square called Vázquez de Molina. And this square, I say a square makes it sound small, but it's not. This square is a very large rectangle. Yes, it's not square and it's not small. It's a very large rectangular space with huge buildings on each side, or several huge buildings on each side. And there's a chapel which is extremely ornate on the inside. This chapel was a chapel of rest for a very wealthy family. And actually, when you go inside, it feels like you're in a cathedral or something along those lines, more than a chapel of rest. It's a very huge building and very ornate. The architect was Diego de Siloe, who was the same architect as Granada Cathedral. So imagine if a family was so wealthy to have an architect who'd built a cathedral to build their chapel of rest. Well, you can just imagine. I mean, it's very superlative, very over the top.
Well, I think chapel of rest may be a British term. We would call it a funerary chapel, or basically a chapel where people are buried. Is why we're resting there. A private family chapel, and again, chapel just doesn't seem like the right thing. When we were touring the city, our tour guide said, "What do you think this is?" And we said, "Well, clearly it's the church." And it's not. It has never been a church. It was just built for a family. And inside, it's very Baroque right now, but I guess it was originally not. It was originally Renaissance, as you said, much of the town was. But some very wealthy family built this and then married into nobility. And so it's now a noble family, but the person who built it was not at the time in his life, but his kids were.
Yes, and the chapel is probably one of the most impressive buildings on the square, but then there's many other buildings on the square worth visiting. Next door to the chapel is the Parador, another Parador. So that's Parador of Ubeda, so you can stay there. You can also eat there, and it's worth just walking through the door to see the inner courtyard or the patio, which is very serene and very Andalusian style architecture.
Yeah, the only difference being that this one is now roofed so that they could air condition the interior, because we haven't said, at least we haven't said in this version of the recording, that this region gets pretty warm. And so it can be quite warm in the summer times in this area. And so they decided to fix it in this particular case and give the people who are staying there a little more shade.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it would generally mean that for 3 or 4 months of the year, for lunch service, you wouldn't want to eat in that patio. And so that's a lot of trade to lose, not only from the people who are staying at the hotel, but also from locals who want to have lunch at the Parador. So the temperatures can easily get to 105 at lunchtime for, I would say, in June, second part of June, July and August. So Western Andalusia, whether it be Cordoba, Granada or Jaén, are extremely warm in the summer months. So I would kind of think, if you want to be visiting monuments and walking around and enjoying these places, then to avoid those hot summer months, unless you don't mind the heat,
right.
And then you're going to get very cheap hotel rates because it's our low season.
Right. Well, you were saying that just recently in Granada, where you live, it was 108, and when I was in Sevilla last week, it was 107. So yeah, quite warm. Or if you're in Celsius, we're talking low 40s at this point. So
yeah, in Granada we had 41.3 2 days ago. So this is mid-June. So
hot.
a very early heat wave. But yes, it's happening.
Excellent. What else are we seeing in Ubeda?
So in Ubeda, we're still
sorry.
in this, we're still in the main square of Vázquez de Molina. We've got this grand funerary chapel on one side, along with the Parador, which is next door, and then directly across the way, on the opposite side of the square, we've got a very grand church called Real Alcázar, and the church has got like a double bell tower, which is quite difficult to describe without seeing a photo of it. And this double bell tower makes it very ornate. It's actually a very beautiful silhouette of the facade of the church. So a lot of people like to get married there, or have their wedding photos there, or have christenings there. So it's always very busy in spring and summer with local celebrations.
Okay.
Then we have on the square a police station, which doesn't sound very glamorous, but I promise you it is. It looks like a palace, and it's very large, and it just looks like some kind of French or Italian palace. It's very stunning. And I think that more or less concludes the main buildings around that square. On one side of the square, we have a very beautiful viewpoint. It's almost like a street that makes a balcony over the landscape below. And you can see for a very long distance, and it just seems to be a sea of olive trees. And it's one of the nicest views I've ever seen of Andalusian countryside. It stays with you.
Yeah. No, I think it rivals Tuscany. I really do think that it's a beautiful, beautiful area with the hills in the backgrounds and these white hilltop villages.
Yes.
Except without the tourists.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not a main tourist destination. You do get some Spanish tourists who are visiting on weekends, who want to see the architecture, who want to buy good olive oil, that kind of thing. And so people might go to Ubeda and Baeza for a weekend as a typical thing. They'll stay in a hotel 2 nights, visit Baeza on one night, Ubeda the next night, and then go to wherever they came from, Madrid or Valencia or wherever. But in the midweek, I think it's not a busy destination at all, neither for Spanish tourists nor for international tourists. Also for Ubeda, we need to think about where we're going to have lunch, because that's always high up on my itinerary. So rather than naming a specific restaurant, I would just point people in the direction of Calle Real, because I remember on that street we ate in several different locations, a couple of tapas here, a dish here and a dish there, and it was all wonderful.
Well, we stayed actually when I was there 2 weeks ago as part of a press trip with Visit Andalucia in the Hotel Palazzo. Sorry, I'm saying that with the Italian accent. Palacio de Ubeda, which was a very lovely 5-star hotel just off that street, and so it's not a bad place to stay. Also, is somewhere along there because that's really where I think the heart of the city is, at that old town.
Yeah, that's totally right. Yeah. So once we've finished in Ubeda, the next town is Baeza, which is also UNESCO World Heritage. And Baeza, while Ubeda is very grand and there's like palatial buildings and everything has a lot of space, Baeza is quite different. It's more compact. I think it's more charming. And I don't know, it just seems more atmospheric to me. Baeza also has a very important cathedral, which is one of the oldest cathedrals in Spain. But one of the things that most sticks out to me is the Plaza del Populo. It's a square which on two sides has buildings and on the other two sides is open. One of the open sides has a gateway, like a Muslim archway almost. And that is called Puerta de Jaén, and it used to be the archway in the walled city to open the road to go to Jaén, the capital city. And in that square is a very old fountain that I can't tell you the date of. I can tell you the date that it came to Baeza. The fountain was moved from a place called Castelló, and it was moved there in 1510. But that fountain is called the Lion's Fountain, and their lions are so old that they just look like blocks of rock, really. They're not really recognizable as lions. They could be dogs or they could be anything, any animal. It looks like an animal, but not defined as a lion because they're so extremely old. So that's from an archaeological site in Castelló, which is out in the fields of Jaén. And that fountain is the center focus of this square, Plaza del Populo.
You said an archaeological site. So we're talking about a Roman city, basically, that was abandoned. And when it was abandoned, and that was where I was recommended as somebody who loves Roman ruins. You know, if I'm wanting to see more of those in this particular area, that would be where I was directed to go.
Yeah, so Castelló is an Iberia Roman archaeological site, and it's just made me remember that in Jaén capital, in the city of Jaén, that I didn't mention before, there's a museum of Jaén, and it has a lot of archaeological finds housed in that museum, and some are from Castelló and some are from other places, but very, very old pieces. But yes, the Plaza del Populo in Baeza has this beautiful gateway. It has this ancient fountain in the center. On the back wall is one of the buildings is the old city archive, which is now the tourism office, and is set in an absolutely beautiful building. And then on the other side of the square is an old butcher's that is from the 16th century, and it so doesn't look like a butcher's. It again looks like palatial, and now it's actually the courthouse for Baeza. And so if we walked through this square, up a little staircase, and then start winding our way through narrow streets towards the back, we would come to the Cathedral of Baeza. It's worth noting that not only it's interesting to go inside the cathedral and see Baeza Cathedral, but also the streets around it and behind it are very narrow and very atmospheric, and some of the balconies are really charming, stuff with plant pots and very pretty architecture. Just a regular house in Baeza is even pretty.
Very Andalusian white town kind of look.
Yeah, that's right. And as we come outside the cathedral, there's a very beautiful fountain that is the St. Mary's Fountain, and it's from the 1500s. That fountain is the symbol of the city of Baeza. So if you ever see anything about Baeza, they always have the photo there, or it's the symbol of the city. And then just down from there, we've got a very old building that is the University of Baeza. And then still a little bit further down the street, we have the Palacio of Jabal Quinto that used to be the University of Baeza as well. And it's actually the most stunning building and it was a nobleman's palace, and then it became the university, and I believe now it's a high school.
We were told it. Well, oh, sorry, you're in the other one. Sorry,
I'm in the one where it
that
has
is
like
closer.
Knobbles on the front of the building.
Exactly. Well, there's two parts of the university, and one was a palace as well that was given as a wedding gift, and that's the other piece, not the one that's the high school that's now an international university.
Yeah.
And I still thought that's got to be the prettiest high school I've ever seen, the old university building. But the interesting thing for me was the inscriptions in red on the outside of the university. And I was told something different from what you told me. You filled in some knowledge that I didn't have, because we were told that this was graduates of the university, but I got a simplified version. What was I missing?
Yeah, so they're old inscriptions on the university facade, and also these inscriptions are visible in other places, such as Salamanca, and in Granada we have some on the Royal Chapel. And basically these are graffitis for people who've graduated from a university, and they're celebrating, and they want to kind of mark the date that they graduated. But rather than it being every single student that graduated, the only people who did that were sons of very prominent people, either wealthy people or influential people at the time. So it would have been bourgeoisie at the least. And their sons marking their graduation for everybody to see, like a public announcement almost, but then it's there for history. So rather than clean it up, they've been left as historical inscriptions, but these are very recent compared to the age of the building. I mean, they're not recent, they're 17th century, probably 18th century.
Right.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Oh, one thing that we didn't say with the cathedral that's worth going into, if you go back into the sacristy of the cathedral, so where they store the vestments, the thing that priests wear, and some of those things, they have a wonderful old book collection, including some large illustrated music manuscripts that were for the choir, because every member of the choir didn't have their own music. It was just too expensive. So a pretty little area in the back of the cathedral worth going into.
Excellent. I didn't know about that.
Well, there you go. Anything else we should cover in Baeza?
Yes. So in Baeza, we need to cover the Plaza de Constitución. This main square used to be a marketplace, and it's a large esplanade or a large open space, which is where you can park your car if you just arrive to Baeza. There's parking spots around there. And there's a bandstand, and if there's anything going on, like there's the town fair or any special event, it nearly always is on there. And around that area, there are restaurants and bars and terraces as well, and some shops. And it's also worth mentioning because it's the heart of the city centre.
Excellent. Now, you have a couple other spots that you wanted to cover in Jaén that I have not been to.
Yes, that's right. Well, the thing is, the province of Jaén is quite big, and there's lots of places, but places that I find of special interest would be, for example, Alcalá la Real. Now, Alcalá la Real you were saying that Jaén was the border between Christian and Muslim kingdoms. Well, Alcalá la Real has always been a border town between Granada and Jaén, and that town has been contested many times over history, and sometimes it's been belonging to one province and sometimes to another. And it has a very important fortress, which is called Fortress of La Mota, M-O-T-A. Alcalá la Real is on the way to Granada. The Mota fortress, you can see it for a really, whichever way you come on the road, you can see it. It's very white and very imposing on the land, and it's a 13th century castle. They always have a lot of things going on there. Like, they have activities and festivals, and in the summer they do like a medieval market, and yeah, it's really worthwhile visiting. Alcalá la Real, the actual town, not just to talk about its castle or its fortress, is also worthwhile because it's a little bit like a small Baeza. They've got some nice architecture. It's very untouched by tourism. Locals are there. The food is very good. And in summer, they have a festival where they're doing like nighttime concerts and things like that. And yeah, it's an interesting and unusual destination to visit, but usually with a lot of cultural activities, particularly on weekends. And then the last place I would like to mention in Jaén is Baños de Encina, which is the place where the Burgalimor Castle is, which is the oldest castle in Europe. And Burgalimor is absolutely impeccably preserved. And when you're in the castle, you can see on one side like the river and the mountains, and on the other side you can see the town. And it's got like a lot of turrets. It's like a Lego castle. It's like the iconic castle, but in real life.
I understand what you're saying. Okay.
And extremely old. Actually, it's an Islamic fortress. It's 100 meters long and got 15 watchtowers. So, I mean, it's really something. When you visit it, they do like a guided tour. It's really charming. And the town of Baños de la Encina is, again, another charming Andalusian town, just to wander around, to go and see the church, to have nice food, and to just basically be immersed in an Andalusian life for a little while you're on holiday.
No, this is definitely someplace that I need to get back to. That's pretty amazing. One thing that I noticed about when you were talking about Alcalá la Real is that it also has been inhabited since the Paleolithic age. There are signs of human presence going back to prehistoric time, which is true in a couple different places in Andalusia. You can see caves, for instance, with cave art going back, 10, 12, 14,000 years, which is something that is amazing if you get a chance to do that.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of what we call Iberos, like information about the Iberos in Jaén province as well, which I think the easiest place to access that is at the Museum of Jaén. Like, certainly as a starting point.
So I think you're talking about the people who predate the Romans and the Carthaginians coming into the region.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The 6th century, around that time.
Excellent. Or BC, yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that was your itinerary that you promised us. Is there anything else you want to add? If I had another day, you would throw in what?
Oh, well, there's so many things. For example, Castillo de Locobin is a place that's famous for cherries, and they have a cherry festival. But, I mean, you've got to go specifically at the time of the cherry festival, which is the 1st of July. It's just about to come up now. And so they're doing like lots of food, obviously recipes to do with cherries, like cherry soup and anything to do with cherry sauce and cherry pie and cherry everything. But the cherries are produced there in Castillo de Locobin, and they're exported to Germany. They're exported in different places in Europe. But of course, we eat a lot of them in Spain as well. And the cherries are absolutely amazing.
Oh,
really, really good.
And I'm realizing we had a cherry gazpacho, and that's not the name of it. That's got another name when we were there.
No, that's right. That's what it's called.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
I thought they had a specific name for it, but I'm drawing a blank anyway. But yeah, very different. I'd never seen that before.
No, it will just be a gazpacho de cereza, cherry gazpacho in Spanish. So instead of using, it's just the same gazpacho recipe, but you've got a lot of cherries in there and less tomatoes, or no tomatoes, depending on how they do it. But it's absolutely delicious.
It was good, but it was quite different.
Yeah, it's a savory cherry recipe.
Excellent. Anything else you would tell us that we need to know before we go to Jaén?
The hotels in Jaén province, they are in the main cities. So you'd need to look at hotels, for example, in Jaén city, or in Úbeda, or in Baeza, or in Alcalá la Real. And then in other areas, they're going to be more rural type of accommodation. like maybe a farmhouse that you can rent or something along those lines. But those tend to be longer rentals. So it wouldn't be just a couple of nights. It would be for 2 weeks or a month.
Okay.
But I think just to focus on the cities as places where to stay, it would be easier, especially if you want things like internet connection or air conditioning or whatever, like normal things people
depending on the
look
season
for.
you're going, both of those could be very handy. Well,
Yes.
you were saying the summer being cheaper. The place that we stayed in, the Palacio de Ubeda, was less than $200 a night was the rack rate in June. For a 5-star hotel, that's pretty darn amazing.
Yes, that hotel is really wonderful. And I think they also have a restaurant there and they celebrate a lot of weddings and family celebrations there. But that hotel is absolutely stunning. And yes, I can imagine that in July and August, that hotel is very inexpensive for the kind of service and the experience you're going to have.
Right.
In places like that, it will tend to be expensive September through to probably January, and then it will be low again January, February, and then March, April, May will be expensive.
Okay. Yeah, the winters, as they told us, are cold and the summers are hot, and the in-between is more pleasant.
Yeah, the best time for those locations are basically March to beginning of June or September, October, and that's when more people are around. I'm not going to say it's busy because that would be an exaggeration, but there are more Spanish nationals visiting those areas in those seasons.
Excellent. Well, Molly, we're in real danger of actually finishing the show this time. As we get to some of our wrap-up questions, you're standing in the prettiest spot in Jaén. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
For me, in the Plaza del Popolo in Baeza, most definitely. Okay. Looking at the lions on that fountain with the gate of Jaén in the background.
And the prettiest tourism office in the world?
Most likely, yes.
Excellent. And one thing that makes you laugh and say only in Jaén?
I think the heat. The heat, because I have been to a place called Linares, which is a town in Jaén, and I went to their summer fair, which is at the end of the season. I can't remember if it was August or the beginning of September. It was super hot. I was wearing the typical Farallais dress, which is like some people might say it's a flamenco dress. It's not actually correct to say that, but so people can imagine it. It's a very heavy dress with a lot of ruffles.
Oh, no.
And although it's short-sleeved, it's still very heavy. And, of course, a flower in my hair and all of the earrings and the shawl and the whole garb. And we went to the Feria de Linares at lunchtime to dance and drink alcohol with some ridiculous temperature. I don't know what the temperature was. I can't remember, but it certainly would have been 105, if not more. So when I think about something that makes me laugh in Jaén, I think about that moment. That we were probably, me and my friends were the probably only people in the fair dressed like that at that time of day, because they were all waiting until the 8 o'clock.
Right.
Heat curfew.
Well, and it's interesting because we went out to see Ubeda in the evening. I think we met up at like 5:30 or 6:30 or something like that. But you have till 10 o'clock till it gets dark. Well, 10 o'clock till the sun even goes down, let alone till it gets dark. And so, yeah, there's just no point out going out in the heat of the day and in the middle of Jaén or really Andalusia in general, unless you're by the coast.
That's right.
If you wanted to summarize Jaén in 3 words, which I want you to, how would you say? What 3 words would you use?
Undiscovered.
Yes.
Olive trees and castles. I cheated. It's 4.
Excellent. You cheated. By the time you record this 3 times, you could have 5 if you want to. Our guest again has been Molly Sears-Piccavey. And Molly, we mentioned Piccavey.com, but you also do tours. So SpainFoodSherpas.com. And I'm going to guess, just from the title, we're talking food tours, which doesn't surprise me after talking to you about Spain.
Of course. So we have food tours that last around 3 hours or so in Granada City, Malaga City and Seville. And we basically try to share the local insight to the food scene in each location. So rather than it being a generic, we have sangria, we have paella, it's not that. We tell people about what we produce in Granada, what the locals eat in their houses, local recipes, seasonal cuisine, things like that in each one. And actually, even though between Granada and Malaga there's just over 1 hour by car, the food scene is quite different. Malaga is on the coast, Granada
Sure.
is inland and has mountains. So the food scene is very different despite the short distance.
Excellent.
So the idea of our food tours is to give more local insight and local flavour to visitors. And of course, they're all in English.
Well, and I'll put a link to both of Molly's sites in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. Molly, thank you so much for your patience. And thank you so much for sharing with us your love for Spain and particularly for Jaén.
It's been great. Thank you.
I'd like to make a special thanks to patrons of the show who help support the show financially and also just make the work that I put into the show a little more fun. And a special thanks to 2 new patrons of the show, Dan and also Keith Doby. Thanks so much for supporting the show. If you too want to become a patron of the show, you can go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. Also, with this show being the 17th anniversary of Amateur Traveler, this is coming out on the 17th anniversary date. Thanks to all of you who've listened to the show over the years. I don't know if anyone has listened to every episode of Amateur Traveler, or if there are some of you who've done that, thanks to both of you, because it's harder and harder to do that these days. There are a lot of episodes. And of course, we're recovering some places, and then every once in a while we discover new places like Jaén that I really didn't know anything about. So those are real fun for me. And speaking of patrons of the show, Jeff Ulfs, who's been a guest on the show, wrote about the episode we did recently on Iceland and said, the South Iceland episode brought back so many memories of Iceland. One of the memories was the homes to the hidden people, gnomes, elves, etc., which are rock piles where the roads are built around. One fun activity I enjoyed was dog sledding on, here's one of those Icelandic names, Myrdalsjökull Glacier. Finally, a visit to the Westman Islands is great, but you might consider a sightseeing flight of Surtsey Island. The island emerged in a volcanic eruption in November 1963 from under the ocean. I don't know if it still holds the designation of being the newest island on Earth to be created. It's a scientific reserve with access by permit only, so a sightseeing flight is the only way to see it. They are researching plant and animal life colonizing the island. An added bonus was also the views of Iceland's countryside and coast from the air, including the Westman Islands. Forgot to comment about the hot dogs. Icelanders like their hot dogs, pilsa. You can get them everywhere, bacon wrapped, etc. The best dog in Reykjavik is Bjarnins Betsu, a small 10x10 shack made famous by then President Clinton stopping by and having a hot dog. It's the Pinks of Reykjavik. Thanks so much, Jeff. I had a recent review from Russets, who said, Amateur Traveler is the best travel podcast. I spend most of my time traveling, and that involves lots of research on places I am visiting. I use Amateur Traveler's excellent location-based podcasts as part of my trip planning, and I find that they greatly enhance my itinerary. Well, thanks so much. I don't know if it's the best travel podcast, but it's the one that I want to do. That's really, I think, all you can ask for at this point. 17 years in, I'm making the show I want. And I know that for some of you, you would prefer it to be something else, and I understand that. That's certainly okay. But with all the work I put into it, I hope you can understand why it's important to me to do the show that I like. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening. Not sure I've got 17 more years in me, but maybe another 12.